There, St. John mingles with my friendly bowl, the feast of reason and the flow of soul.
Hello, and welcome to Feast of Reason. This week, we're going to tackle an interesting question. Why do smart people self-sabotage? If human beings are such rational creatures, why do we so often act against our own interests? Today, we'll be exploring one version of that question. And our guest is Dr. Albert Bramante, whose career as a talent agent has given him a front row seat to the ambition, fear, ego, rejection, status anxiety, and self-sabotage so prevalent in the entertainment industry. His doctorate in psychology and work as a therapist give him deep insight into the roots of those behaviors and what they reveal more broadly about human nature itself. Albert Bramante, welcome to Feast of Reason.
Thank you so much, Matt, for having me on here.
I'm excited about this one. Maybe I'll learn something disturbing about myself. We'll find out. So just to kind of break the ice here, why do you think intelligent people repeatedly act in their own interests or seem to act outside of things that are in their interest?
Well, a lot of it has to do with staying in our comfort zone. And as human beings, we're wired to stay comfortable. We're wired to maintain our comfort zone. And I think that ultimately may work against us because we cannot really grow or we cannot really expand if we stay in our comfort zone. And our brain is designed to do that. Our brain does a wonderful job of keeping us alive. And so it's doing its work. And so when it sees a new stimulus, whether that be fear or just something out of the ordinary, it may register to us as that, okay, this is dangerous, this is something new we should avoid.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, we stay comfortable. There's no risk involved, but then we don't necessarily get to the next level, the next elevation that we're supposed to get to.
Okay. So that's actually interesting to me because it sounds like, in a sense, it's not correct to categorize it as irrational because it's serving this behavior is serving some other psychological need. Even though from maybe even a dispassionate position, it seems like it's not serving.
Right. No, and it's not ultimately serving a need, but it is keeping us comfortable. And so our rational brain, which is irrational a lot of times, is perceiving that as, okay, I'm keeping this person safe. Because if you look back at human evolution for hundreds of years ago, we were in a hunter-gathering days. We had so many threats to our survival, that we don't have today. Whether it be, animals of prey, other, people, weather, temperature. So all these things, play a factor, and these were threats. So our brain does a great job of detecting these fears and protecting us from it. However, times have changed. We no longer experience those threats anymore. However, to this day, when our brain recognizes or acknowledges something is new, something foreign, it's going to start protecting you and thinking, okay, I need to protect this person from everything from anything moving forward.
There's an expression that we all use. We talk about, at least those of us in the first world, talk about first world problems. And I've often felt like there is this need that we have, sort of this crisis management, engine that we have in our body that was built around, running away from tigers and trying to figure out how to stay alive till dinner. And it gets like overlaid onto, traffic jams and your Amazon delivery showing up an hour later than you expected. So do you think that is there some validity to that there's just we've got this kind of psychological wiring, whether it's hardware or software, that compels us to inflate little mild inconveniences into catastrophes because we just want to deal with catastrophe?
Absolutely. Well, to even echo or expand on that, which I think is a great point, our brain is more wired to pay attention to the negative, and which would be catastrophes, which would be, things that are going to go, what can go wrong. Because again, it's designed to keep us alive. And so that is so important. But we often have a negativity bias. So, most of the time we're always wondering what can go wrong, and little minor inconveniences like, again, a packaging being late or someone not answering email right away can be perceived as a minor inconvenience because we're already looking for that. We're already wired to do that. An example I give is, let's say you do something and 15 people compliment you and tell you did a great job, but 2 people may tell you some constructive or tell you that they didn't like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what are we focusing on? We're focusing on the 2 that didn't, and we're almost negating the other, 15 that told us it was great. So I think, and again, what our brain is doing is the right thing by nature, by, again, keeping us alive. So this is where we need a little bit more of conscious override
Mm.
to sit there and say, okay, what, that was then, this is now. And it's learning to push through the discomfort, being able to push through the bit of tension that we're going to face. And I think that's where a lot of people make it confused, because they think, well, if it's supposed to be very good for me, why do I experience a bit of hesitation or apprehension? And my point is that's a good thing.
Mhm.
And that we need to be having conversations and embracing.
So maybe it's more about developing a level of self knowledge to be able to evaluate where these things are coming from, more than some this a manufactured crisis engine. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and again, our brain does a wonderful job at manufacturing crises. It's amazing what it can do, because
Yeah.
it can make a mountain out of a molehill. If you think about it, it can take these little things and blow them into complete, catastrophes. And the one thing our brain is also very good at, and this is one thing we have to work with, is imagining the worst case scenario and then going with it. And
Right.
because oftentimes when we do something, or when we're facing an obstacle, we tend to naturally sometimes go into that. It's the worst case scenario and everything's going to go bad. The truth of the matter is, if you look at it from an objective standpoint, very often we don't really see, or it doesn't really ever happen as bad as we perceive it to be.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of times, because I've noticed, I can tell can recall this from personal experience, how a lot of times where the worst case scenario did come true, but it was never nearly as severe or the catastrophe as I had imagined it would be.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's part of it too, is like, okay, even if the decision you're about to do, or even the thing that you're planning to do, even if it does go haywire or doesn't go in the direction that you want it to or go your way, it's never going to be as severe as you're imagining it to be.
Yeah. I've got the personal experience with two quite different psychological profiles on that in just my marriage. So my wife she seems most comfortable thinking about the worst thing that could happen, because then she's either right or it's good news. Right? I mean, it's kind of and whereas I'm kind of the opposite. I'm an inveterate optimist, and I also feel like I'm kind of fast on my feet. And if something happens, I will deal with it when it happens, and then I can I can work with it then. And that the so she likes to really plan things out and know how something's going to be, and then of course it never turns out that way, and that can be frustrating. But there is my older brother with from the same gene pool, right? We're opposites in that way. He was very much a pessimist, and there was a certain, almost like the stereotypical Russian kind of attitude of like it's all terrible, and then when it turns out terrible, you see, you know, and then
Hmm.
as opposed to this, like, hey, well, it's I think it's no, it's great, and I think it's gonna work out, and we'll deal with stuff that pops up. So I think there different people definitely respond differently to that choice, right?
Absolutely. And again, it all varies based on our background. So,
Yeah,
um, and our because if you think about it, the same event can happen, but we have filters. Everyone has a unique filter about it.
right.
And the interesting about memory is that we could have went through the same experience, you know, and have a totally
Hmm.
different, account of it. And then it
Yeah,
starts to be, it's like, well, who's correct and who's not correct? And that's not the right answer, that we should be asking.
mm,
Because again, memory is never, that's one of the things I found, and tons of research will back this up. We think our memory is a snapshot of an event, and it's not.
yeah.
It's our own expectations, our own biases that come in there. And a lot of times, two people can go through the same event, but remember completely different.
Yeah, yeah. The jails are full of people who were misremembered, right? Yeah, it's we're learning. I know
Unfortunately.
we're learning more and more about that.
Yeah, and that's why, eyewitness testimony, even with the best of intentions,
Yeah,
eyewitness testimony is limited, even, and that's where there's a lot of people in our correction system that uh, shouldn't be there because of they looked a certain way, they resembled maybe somebody who actually did,
yeah,
and a lot of times what we think happened, didn't quite go that way.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thinking about the entertainment industry broadly, which I'm much more familiar with the music industry, having been in professional audio and kind of worked in that, but thinking about my perception of what actors' lives are like. They face constant rejection. There's identity instability. They're judged
Mhm.
by the public. They have our comparison. There's a status comparison that happens, and these sort of social tiers within that. Tremendous uncertainty, right?
Yes.
I hear even really famous actors talking about, when am I going to get another job? Oh my god! And yeah, but Jim Carrey did a wonderful bit about, I don't know if you ever saw it, where he's finished up. He says, "I've just wrapped this movie," and that's inside term for Hollywood. I'm on the phone with my agent saying, "Give me a job," you know,
Yeah. No,
which broke the room down.
and it's true because that a lot of it's not like any other profession where, okay, you can work in a stable company for a number of years. As soon as a job is over, you're starting back from square one again.
You're unemployed. Yeah,
You're unemployed and you're looking for work, and you got to prove yourself now all over again.
yeah,
Unless you become like an A-list actor, where the offers just come to you. You
yeah.
have to constantly work, and that can be an issue because um there is that instability, and it's so competitive.
Are there patterns that you see in talented performers? Are there things that you can kind of identify that are common, or at least common in groups of performers?
Well, I think a lot of it is the inner critic, the getting in their head,
Mm,
a lot of times, and that can affect the performers. If you look at, one of the things that I often say that separates those that thrive and those that kind of fall through the wayside, it's not talent. And I know that's gonna be controversial for me to say, but it's their system that they put in. It's their mindset that
mm,
they're putting in. Because a lot of times, some of the actors that we're seeing out there aren't the most talented. I mean, they're good, but they're not. There's so many actors that are really good that will, unfortunately, the public's never going to really see
mhm,
or get to know, and a lot of that is because of the system they play in, the mindset they go into. The one thing I noticed, especially, is if I can see an actor who can be very good, on stage or even on screen, but when it comes to auditioning, it's a separate skill set, and
mm,
there's a lot of actors that are very good actors, but not very good auditioners
mm,
because of that judgment. And the way to break free from that and it takes work, but it's to start looking at every audition as a performance rather than I'm being judged. There's a whole lot weighing on this, 1 to 2 minute opportunity now that I have in a room.
Hmm.
Instead of it saying, okay, I have 1 to 2 minutes to actually demonstrate what I know and what I can do and my talent and my training. And I have an opportunity to play a character for 2 minutes. When you adopt that mindset, you're no longer auditioning or acting, and you're doing the work, you're performing. And that is one thing I often see that can start to increase at least your booking ratio, is if you have that system mentality in there of, okay, I'm performing, I'm not auditioning, I'm not being judged, because you're not worried about, are they going to like me? Are they going to, what do they think? You're not even paying attention to that, because that throws off a lot of actors too. Is they'll go into a room and there may be a casting director or a panel of producers that may not be the most friendly, smiling. Some of them are really, serious looking,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that can throw some actors off. Because I'll even say, "Well, I don't think they like me." I'm like, "Well, how do you know that?" You know, and a lot of actors, and I think all of us do, going back to that whole thing of catastrophizing earlier, blow things out of proportion. Make assumptions.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
the casting director didn't like me. I was like, "Why?" They didn't smile. Like, so I'm like, "Did they tell you they didn't like you?" And no. I'm like, "Well, then where are you concluding that?"
Yeah.
And because when I first started out, I remember one time I had an actress who went on the commercial audition, and she, after the audition was over, she was very upset because she's like, "I don't think they'll like me." I said, "Okay, what made you think that?" Well, I was done within 30 seconds in the room and I was gone. I was like, "Well, that could mean two things." And this is going in my head. I'm like, either you weren't right or you were right, and they didn't need to see any more. It turns out it was the latter, because she booked the job.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, they got you out of there because A, they were in a rush. They had a lot of people. And B, they already saw what they needed. So,
Yeah.
bye-bye. And that's where we have to not, because I've seen it happen a number of times where an actor will say, "I think I just bombed this. I did a bad job." And I'm like, and then we're not booking it. And then on the other side, I've had, actors say, "I think I nailed this. This is mine," and never hear anything.
I think not a little bit of a parallel. I've done a fair bit of public speaking, sometimes in rooms with hundreds of people or whatever. In my profession, and it was something I was always comfortable with. And some people would ask me, would marvel, and I always felt like it's an incredibly uncomfortable situation to be in a room and somebody's just awkward and bombing. So everybody in the room, I always felt like everybody in the room is rooting for me. They want the presentation to be good. They want it to be engaging. So if you kind of just approach it with that confidence and sort of it just always seemed to work. And I wonder if there's a similarity there. I mean, I wouldn't imagine that people who are going to invite somebody in for casting and do that and be hoping that they suck, right? So that they can make they want to find somebody who's good,
Well,
so
and that's the thing too. They have a need. They have a role that they need to fill. So and money is on stake. So they're not going to invite you in if they don't like you. They're not going to invite you in
right.
expecting to fail. They want you to succeed. They're on your side. And that's another thing, is when you walk in there, think, okay, they really want me to succeed. Let me help them, do the best I can. And also, there's a lot of things that are not in your control, for an actor. That an actor can give a really great audition, but still not book the job, and still not, land a callback. But that doesn't mean that they did bad, that they did everything right. It could have just been that they're too tall, an inch too tall, the wrong hair color, the wrong weight, the wrong everything, for the character, or someone else just embodied the character in a better way in the director's mindset. So,
Or the
and
producer's son-in-law was auditioning.
Exactly. And there is a lot of, unfortunately, there's a lot of nepotism, just like with any
Yeah.
business and
Yeah.
any industry. But, the truth of the matter is, this is why I often tell actors not to take the rejection personally.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of people get, I think another misconception is you often hear a lot of people say, I tried this acting thing, or I really couldn't do show business. I didn't like the rejection. I'm like, well, it's not rejection because number one, all they're telling you is, not today. You didn't get the role. Has
Yeah.
nothing to do with you, yourself, your worth, nothing. It's just telling you you didn't get the job. So I look at it like this: there's no such thing as rejection in this industry. It's really just about your services are not needed today.
So would you say that given some base layer of talent, right? You can't just like not be able to act at all, but given some base layer of talent, is psychology then your psychological mindset and your resiliency more important than talent? As important?
Um, Absolutely. I would say probably just maybe even more important is
Mm,
the grit and the resilience and perseverance, because again, it's going to take time. It's going to take years, and that's where like one of the things I often talk a lot with young actors, those that are going to college, that are graduating from high school, that want to do this as a career. I'm like, this is a longevity career. This is not an overnight success. There, yes, we do hear stories of people being overnight success and in our industry. But the truth of the matter is that what you don't often see is that overnight success took several years to build. So, it just may have been appeared that it was overnight because we haven't heard from that about them. Now all of a sudden they're a household name. But it took years in the making for that to happen. So you need that perseverance, and I often tell people you need at least a 10, or 20-year plan. You want to be a professional actor? At least look at 10 years, 20, or even 20 before you'll see any real type of traction happening. To a point where you become that, that name or that successful working actor. Um, and also one of the things that I've found is yeah, and to be another thing that I think helps with success is it's almost sounds backwards because a lot of people think, well, to be a working actor, I need to, have this amount of commercial, this amount of projects under my belt. But actually, it's the opposite. You have to have the mentality, the identity of
mm.
a working actor first before the other metrics will happen. So when you identify yourself as a successful working actor, it will open you up for other things because you're not going to be walking into that room thinking, "Are they going to like me? Are they going to like me? Are they going to like me? Did I say this word wrong? Where's my mark?" And that's where actors start overthinking. Like, where's my line and all of this stuff. And the one of the biggest critical feedbacks that I often give to a lot of actors when I'm looking at performances or at showcases is to get out of their head. Because even performing in a scene is like having a conversation, with your scene partner on some level. You have to listen. And a lot of times what actors are doing, especially younger actors that are more that are in their nerves, they say their line. Now the other character is saying the line, but in their head, they're focusing on what's my next line gonna be. And then now the audience may not pick up on this, but what's gonna happen is the audience is gonna say, I didn't believe what they were selling. I didn't believe their performance. It come off as flat because they're not really listening or engaging with their scene partner in their authentic way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, so how much does fear of success come into this, right? Do people actually fear success more than they fear failure? Is that a failure point for an actor?
I think it's actually equal. I mean, definitely fear of success has a huge role. And
Hmm.
because when you look at our identity, we become very comfortable in an identity. And very often we identify as an out of work actor, struggling actor. Again, it keeps
Yeah.
us comfortable. And it sounds absurd, from an outside perspective. Like, well, why would someone want to be a struggling actor? Because that's what they're comfortable with. Now, if they become successful and land a job or become a name, their lives are going to change and upend in so many ways. Now, obviously, hopefully for the better, but nonetheless, your life is going to change. It's going to be uprooted.
Yeah.
And also about the relationships play a huge role here too. A lot of the relationships that you're in, if you become successful, may change. Not always, but may change. People can become jealous, can become insecure. If you're friends with other actors and you land this huge role and you take off, you may be dealing with some jealousy. You
Yeah.
may be dealing with some envy. You may be dealing with some resentment. Also from your family. Now, I know this is another topic that maybe a bit controversial. Your family and friends obviously do want you to succeed. I'm not going to say that, but they can also be threatened by that too.
Hmm.
And if they're dealing with their own insecurity, they're going to project that onto you. And so therefore they may get jealous if you become successful. And so what do they do with that? They start pulling away. They start becoming very critical or judgmental towards you. And I was watching an interview a while back from a TV personality who happens to be a psychic medium. Now, whether you believe that or not, but he became an overnight celebrity and got his own TV show. The one thing that he said that really made it interesting was, you thought when I landed a TV contract that everyone in my family would be proud of me. So a lot of people stopped talking to him and his family.
Mm.
And I'm like, that's interesting. And I think that's more of a reality too that can happen.
Hey, he should have seen that coming.
Bingo! I like that.
Yeah.
That.
Uh,
But it's true, and it's that can happen. And not all the time. It's not. It's a rarity. That can happen, but it can happen. And so what happens is that another thing that we're wired to do is connection, human connection. That's
yeah.
important in our DNA. It's important for survival, because if we were isolated or lonely, back in the earlier days, we would be, left to die, and we couldn't fend for ourselves. So, the threat or potential threat to be ostracized is really great for survival and really threatening to our nervous system and brain.
Oh, yeah.
So if there's a potential chance, not saying that there is, but even if there's a slight perceived chance of that happening, brain is going to say, okay, you know what? We're not going to do this. And
Yeah.
so now,
Mhm. Go on. I'm sorry.
and consciously, what's going to happen? This is not going on consciously, but subconsciously, that's going on. What can happen unconsciously is you're going to come up with a rational reason why this is not a good idea. Why this is
Right.
not, you're too tired. It's too much work. You got a headache. You got an illness. Whatever it is, it's going to come up, and it's going to seem very plausible rationally.
Yeah. I could imagine where you're essentially talking about a tribal shift, right? I would imagine that it's even more of a pull from leaving the tribe of struggling, unworking actors and entering the tribe of successful working actors. On the one hand, you've got the pressure. It's like you're sort of the new kid, and now and everybody else is kind of like, what? Hey, rookie, take out the trash, right? That sort of. But also the fact that it's like now you no longer have that. Oh, you probably spend a lot of your time talking with the hostess at the restaurant next door about this audition or that audition, and this didn't happen, and blah blah blah. It's all kind of commiserating about the struggle, and now all of a sudden you're one of the ones who made it. Well, that I would imagine that would be a difficult transition.
It is a difficult transition because it's it's something new, and again, something new is scary.
Yeah, yeah,
And again, if you're in your group that used to commiserate, you may not be invited back into that group again. Unfortunately, because again, you made it. We didn't, and there's going to be that resentment. You know, well,
Yeah.
who did he or she think they are? You know, things like that.
Yeah.
And like they're all high and mighty now. And you're going to get that. So the important thing to do, especially now, is to watch the peer group you're around. You know, do an audit of your social circle. You know, because again, the you know, there's a popular saying, you know, show me the 5 people you hang out with, and I can tell you who you are. So we need to be able to have a good peer group of people that are going to elevate us and support us.
Yeah. Yeah. So we touched a little bit on kind of the instinct and these instincts that we have and these emotions and how we need to try to become more self aware. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things that are coming out in this merging that's starting to happen between psychology and neurology. Where people like Daniel Kahneman with his thinking fast and thinking slow, and Jonathan Haidt intuition before reason, and this we're learning that we're nowhere near as good as we'd like to think we are at being able to reason inside the walls of our own mind, and that very often our reasoning capabilities are used to rationalize these emotions. So I would think in your work that would be a significant challenge, right? How do you get people to do this thing that I think by and large we're pretty terrible at, which is really developing that self awareness to understand where these instincts and emotions that drive us come
Mhm.
from.
Well, emotions and logic are 2 separate pathways in the brain, and sometimes emotions have a bigger override, you know, than logic. And so the important thing to do is to not act on emotion. So, and that's hard to do. That, believe me, I'm not, you know, trivializing that at all. It is hard to do that, but that's important to do. Is to not make snap judgment or snap decisions, to think things through and to work through it and say, is this fear talking or is this, you know, logic? And, you know, because very often when we're in an emotional state, you know, everyone who's listening has definitely done something where they've regretted it 2 minutes later. So they said
Yeah.
something, they did something, or it was like 2 or 3 minutes later, and 5 minutes later, it's like, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that, because that was emotions hijacking and taking over. So the important thing is to, you know, not make a harsh decision right away. You know, take a moment, take even a day, or take, you know, an hour, and just think about it, sleep on it, literally, because then if you need to act in a certain that way, you'll be more rational about it rather than impulsive about it.
So, if thinking about an actor, I think in my mind, there's a spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum are people who are just absolutely passionate to their core about acting, about the craft, and they would do it for free if that was all they do, and and they care nothing about what the accolades or whatever the people give them. They're just purely, probably isn't anybody who's really like that, but that would be the one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum is people who would just see acting as a way to become famous, essentially, to
Hmm.
achieve acclaim and love, and so it's strictly an ego exercise, something to build them up. So how does that seems to me like fruitful territory for the this battle between instinct, emotion, and reason. It seems like it'd be very easy to rationalize someone who's on that far end of the spectrum who's just looking for ego gratification to rationalize all kinds of things about why acting is this wonderful craft and they love it, but that's not what they're really after.
Right.
How do you navigate that?
Well, I mean, the important thing is that's where you have to look at why did you become an actor? Well, if it's to become a celebrity, you don't really need to be an actor to do that. You can be an influencer on social media, and
Yeah.
do that. Um, but you know, a lot of the working actors, you know, that even the successful ones now almost have no desire to be a celebrity. You know, they're doing because they love it, and I think that's going to be more successful because again, you're not going into that audition with this, with the stakes being so high. You're going to the audition performing. I mean, um, and that's where like I've watched interviews of working actors. These are people that you'll see, but you may not know their names, but you've seen them in movies and TV shows, and they're not household names. But if you saw them, you would kind of be like, "Oh, I've seen them before." These actors go into these auditions as a way to say, "This is the work. I'm working. I'm having fun, and I'm enjoying this. Whatever happens is a bonus beyond that."
So not fixated on outcomes, but process.
Exactly. It's a process
Yeah.
and not the outcome, which is hard to do. I mean, because very often another thing a lot of actors get pressure from outside, family they'll go to the families for holidays, so how's your acting career doing? Where can I see you? What am I going to see you in next? And
Mm.
98% of the projects that these actors are doing, no one's going to ever really see, unfortunately, because they're, be so niche or very localized, productions. But, there's still that pressure. And, especially if you land an agent, which I can tell you, a lot of family members are going to say, well, you have an agent now? Why am I not seeing you on TV? Why am I not seeing you, in the blockbuster movies?
Yeah.
I- and then shows like that, because I've had people ask me like, or think, just because, you're I'm an agent or someone's an agent, I can pick up and have Steven Spielberg on speed dial and
Well,
say,
you must have clients that ask you those questions too, right?
occasionally I'm like, well, can you get me a lead in a movie? I'm like,
Yeah.
no. It's not, because we see it in movies. We see it like it shows like Entourage, where, you have this, this agent who is supposed to, sits in their gold plated offices and, goes to these swanky parties and thinks that, okay, it's so easy. I'm like, that's farthest from the truth.
Mm.
Even agents that are working at these big ones, you know, there's still, it's only a small part of it. You know, even like people like at, creative artist agencies or Endeavor, William Martin, the big, or Gersh, or the ones that are really like the empires. They're, you know, they're working very, very hard too.
Uh-huh.
And so I think that's really the truth when it comes to that.
It's an incredibly competitive business that, is under lots of pressures from lots of different sides right now. So, yeah,
Yes.
I can imagine that's the case. Well, one of the things in talking about trying to develop better conscious awareness of what's going on with your unconscious, and you're more schooled in this than I am, but my understanding is that something like 80% of what our brain does is unconscious activity. And so trying to build a bridge between that little sliver of consciousness and the unconsciousness is important and
Hmm.
difficult. And I think one of the tools that you use is hypnosis, is it not?
Exactly, because yeah, and there's a lot of, even people, colleagues in the hypnosis field, some of the greats almost don't even pay attention to what's going on consciously,
Uh-huh.
because that's not the point. Now, I'm kind of in the middle. I definitely think that our conscious mind, is important, but at the same time, if we don't acknowledge that, again, that fear of success, again, thinking that this opportunity is not worth my time. But is that really the case? And that's where going under the hood,
Uh-huh.
sometimes, and what's really going on here. And a lot of things, and this is where, we can get really deep here, but a lot of this stuff happens in our childhood. A lot of these limiting beliefs that we develop about success and failure start from our childhood, start from our parents, from our teachers, from our, family members, and we may not even consciously make those connections. And that's where I feel like hypnosis can sometimes come into play here, because subconsciously we can make that connection.
Yeah. That part I totally get. I am, blissfully ignorant of hypnosis. What I know about hypnosis is the what you see on TV with the guy with the watch, and so it's something I'm kind of naturally skeptical about. But maybe you could
Of
talk a
course.
little bit about what it actually is. Is it suggestibility? Is it focused attention, a state change? What?
It's actually a combination of it all. It is a state change, but it's more a focused attention, like a flow state.
Mhm.
Very often what people see on TV, as you said, and hypnotists snapping their fingers, telling everyone to sleep, and then the people are going to flap down, close their eyes, and look like they're sleeping, but they're actually not. It's not sleep in the sense that we go to bed at night. It's just hyper awareness. It's being just completely aware of your surroundings, but just in a highly suggestible state. And I liken this to suggestibility as learning, because if you weren't suggestible, you couldn't learn, and therefore you're suggestible. Therefore, everyone can be hypnotized. We all are hypnotized. The media, commercials, propaganda,
Uh,
all of this stuff
uh,
hypnotizes us on a daily
uh,
basis. We're just not completely aware of it. So the thing, though, that I will say is it's not mind control, and you cannot hypnotize somebody against their will, nor can we influence free will. So and that's because a lot of people are scared. Well, I'm afraid, hypnosis will make me, do some things I'm morally against. That's
You'll
not
make me
true.
rob a liquor store or something. Yeah.
Exactly. That's not true. Now, what can happen if you have a predisposition to being fearless? I could do that, but if you have a thorough morals, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You're just going to say no. I'm not going to do it, no matter how much. Um, and that's where a lot of people get confused. But and it's all my years of going through training and doing hypnosis, witnessing it, I've never seen someone legitimately do a pocket watch. Most
Uh,
of it is just, like kind of meditation, deep breathe, closing your eyes,
mm,
taking a deep breath in, and just focusing on your breathing. That's all it really is,
mm.
and to get you into that state. Um, we do this all the time. I mean, think about another example of everyday hypnosis. You watch a movie. When you go to sit down and watch a movie or TV show, consciously, and rationally, what you're about to watch is fake. What you're about to watch is phony. But yet, we laugh, what we see, we get angered, and we even get emotional. And why are we getting emotional is something that we know consciously is fake, because it's
And
a
to a certain
suspension of
extent, you lose
disbelief.
the thread even of that. It starts to feel real. You start to you feel. I mean, you kind of know you're not, but you're kind of part of it. You're kind of part of the world.
You're part of that world, yeah, and just,
Yeah,
you get sucked into that world, and so therefore, that's a trance. That's a trance-like state.
interesting.
Same thing when you read a book and you get enthralled in the characters and you start to really feel, what the characters are feeling. Again, what you're reading is just words on a page. All you're doing is seeing images on a screen, but yet you're being transfixed and transformed. Another example, this happens a lot with people who drive. It's called kind of like almost highway hypnosis. Let's say you drive and you've been on the road for an hour and you get to your destination. It may not seem like an hour. It may just be like, where did the time go? I just happened to get in the car and here I am.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, because what happened was your conscious mind disassociated, but your subconscious mind, because you've been driving for so many years, took over.
Yeah,
You really
automatic
did.
pilot.
You went on automatic pilot, so you zoned out into a trance. So we do this. We go into trances all the time, and
And
mhm.
I was going to ask, why do you think some people are more susceptible, if that's the right word, than others, or more open others to
I,
the?
I think because they have active imaginations,
Mhm.
less fear, trust, um, and it really depends upon what the the intentions are of the operator, the facilitator. If there's trust and rapport there, again, we often trust celebrities, we often trust news figures, we trust our doctors. So we're going to be more open to suggestions that they give
Yeah.
because we're already receptive in that way.
Interesting the connection you made to meditation. I've been a regular meditator for 13, 14 years now. And would you expect that but I've never been hypnotized other than by watching TV shows.
Yeah.
And the ways to do, but I've never been officially hypnotized. Would you expect that I would be more or less susceptible as a mindfulness practicer?
It really depends. It could be,
Yeah.
if you're, and this is the one thing too, is like if a person's going to be having any type of fear, that has to be minimized, or skepticism has to be sort of
Yeah.
minimized. The person has to be able to go with the flow. Um, Another thing that I think, because this is why I don't think a lot of times the TV shows don't do us justice, is because, we'll do a session and sometimes people will say, well, I don't think I was hypnotized. I'm like, well, what made you think that? Well, I heard everything you said. I'm like, and? Well, I thought I was going to be zoned out. I'm like, no. And that's where I think a lot of people get that confusion of like, why I think I'm going to be, drooling and zoned out. Like, no,
Yeah.
you know,
But
um,
it's a tool that you've used to help uncover some of these, the deeper reasons behind the struggles people are having, whether it's with auditions or whatever, but the blockages that their own minds are putting in their way.
absolutely. They're
Yeah.
getting in their own way.
Okay. You know,
And that's pointing that out to them. Yes.
yeah. So it's really interesting talking about all this in terms of actors, but if you going out more broadly and kind of still staying in the actor realm, how much of personality do you think for all of us is actually really a script that we essentially, rehearse and perform? Is that
Absolutely. I think a lot of it is a script,
okay?
and because we're playing a role, we're playing, if you think about it, we're all on the stage. If you think, you want to really go that deep, we're on the stage. We're playing a role right here. Where all of us are playing, and everything on the stage. And that's why, all the world is stage. It's one of the Shakespearean quotes is that, think about it, we're all playing a role.
That was Jacques, though, and boy, he suffered from deep depression. He needed some
Yeah,
counseling and maybe medication. that
possibly, yes.
Yeah. So the if reason just in inside the walls of our own mind is often insufficient, how do you actually create the transformations in these people? I mean, you've identified a lot, or in people in general, you've identified some of the tools that you're working with, but maybe there's an example that you have that would kind of illustrate.
Well, a lot of it is, repetition,
Mhm.
it sometimes takes ourselves to be exposed to something, dozens of times before we can actually adopt it. So knowing what's possible. Another thing, hypnotic process that we all do, we don't even realize it is hypnosis, is visualization. Imagining, using our imagination. So, pretending that an event, before an event or a meeting, an interview, an audition, is just visualizing it going very well. You
Mm.
know, Imagine this whole thing going tremendously well. And then, run it through your head of it just going very, very well. And, you know, do this several times, not just one time, because the brain does not know the difference between our imagination and reality. And that's why some people can work themselves up over something that never happened. So it can do the opposite, negative, but let's do it for the positive.
Right.
And that's something that can slowly take in time too. And just being aware of this, and again, not acting on their first emotional whim is an important thing. So sometimes it could just be keep a journal of your thoughts, initially to start with. What's going through your head? Now, we have thousands of thoughts that enter our brain every day. And sometimes they just go out, in and out. Sometimes we choose to dwell on them. The important thing is not to dwell on them and to just let them Okay, they are thoughts. They're going to go in and out. So let's do an audit of what we're thinking about. Let's keep a journal of our thoughts and then come up with a rationality behind each one of them. So that is something that's really, can be powerful too. Not acting on every thought that we have. We don't have to act on every thought.
What about I would think in the certainly it's the case for all humans, but maybe particular for actors because of this kind of uncertainty in the audition process and all these things, that there is so much that is important to them, but is totally out of their control.
Hmm.
So I would imagine it could be very important and yet very difficult to focus on, be clear about what are the things you can control and what are the things that you can't, and you just have to accept what the outcome of those things are
Hmm.
going to be because you can't really do anything about it.
Absolutely. Well, the first, what you can control, they showing up.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing you can control. Being prepared, that's another thing. Doing the work, that's all we can ask. And the rest is out of your, hands. And so another thing that's important and helpful as an actor is every time you have an audition and it's over, let it go. Don't think about it anymore.
Mm,
Your next focus should be on your next job,
mhm.
your next audition. Don't worry about what's going to happen next.
Right. Am I going to get that call? Is that, did they like me? I saw that. Yeah. All that stuff. Yeah. That you're talking about. That makes a lot of sense. I think, uh, if, human beings aren't fundamentally rational creatures, how does this, blowing this out more broadly into, how should we be structuring education, culture, relationships, and society? I mean, we so much of it, in my mind, is built around this idea that you're gonna people are gonna do, if we just educate them and give them the opportunity to reason inside the walls of their own mind, they're gonna do the right thing. But that seems um, uh, uh, increasingly that we seem to be learning that that's just not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And because again, you know, w- a lot of people, we're so slave to thinking about our unconscious mind. We're
Yeah.
so enslaved for that. So very often it's we're so wired on that. And so it's hard to often come into play here. It's hard to be rational. And so that's why, again, this may sound all good, but sometimes it's hard to product. It's hard to
Yeah.
places. It's a lot easier to say some of this stuff, but it's sometimes hard to implement.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I find really fascinating about this conversation is that it really challenges a core fundamental belief of the Enlightenment and philosophers like Descartes, Spinoza, and Kant, that we can be that knowledge naturally leads to better behavior. That all you need to do is to, and I'm not talking about self knowledge. I'm talking about kind of broader knowledge. And I think that we're learning that reason is employed, or at least rationality is employed often in support of these emotional things, and it's really self knowledge that is kind of the key understanding that. And I think that self knowledge is also difficult to do inside the walls of your own mind, and that's why it's helpful to go to somebody like you to get some help with kind of figuring out and really bouncing off. It's kind of the culture of criticism that we talk about in the process of reason, where you come up with an idea and it gets experts kind of look at it and argue about it and hash it out. We kind of need that for self knowledge too, and that's where the work that you do is so important.
Absolutely, no, and it's true. I mean, it does take a lot of work to do.
It's yeah, I think well listen, this has really been a terrific conversation, but I want to make sure that we have a moment here for you to talk a little bit about what you're working on now and where people could find you online and learn more about
Sure.
you.
Sure. Well, one of the things I created was a massive audio library of hypnosis recordings.
Oh,
Um, So I have them on different topics. I have a massive set for actors that I'm putting the finishing touches on, which is over 500 audio programs that you can get. So that's something I'm excited about. I'm launching my own podcast coming up called Mental Rehearsal: Tools for
Great.
Struggling Actors and Actors Who Struggle. So that's what I'm working on right now. And I'm always open up to having new conversations and
Mhm.
and having more dialogues on issues like this, especially you know uh emotion and logic and all those connections there.
Where can people find you online? Do you have a website, a social media
Sure.
presence?
Sure. Both. I'm at albertbramante.com, and I also have a social media presence: LinkedIn, Instagram, and so you can just find me in Albert Bramante there. And yeah, I'd love to get keep in contact with everyone and have conversations.
And all of that could be found through your website. So I'll put the URL in the description
Yes.
of the podcast so that everybody can find it. Well, unfortunately for myself, I'm in that awkward stage. I'm too old to be a romantic lead and too young to play a dirty old man. So I don't think you're going to revive my acting career, which the closest I got to fame was that one of the actors who went on to be shot by Clint Eastwood in a Dirty Harry movie shot me in a high school play.
Oh,
That's as close as
nice.
I got to stardom.
Oh,
All right,
great.
Albert. Listen, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great episode. I think it's went very much beyond the trials and tribulations of a talent agent into deeper issues about the human condition, which was really enjoyable.
Well, great. Thank you so much for having me on here.